The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across Alexander Sterling's perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit as he drummed his fingers against the mahogany table. The high-end restaurant buzzed with the quiet murmur of Boston's elite, but his attention kept drifting to the petite waitress, efficiently moving between tables. Her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her movements precise and purposeful. There was something different about her. While other servers seemed eager to curry favor with the wealthy patrons, she maintained a quiet dignity, treating everyone with the same respectful but measured attention. No excessive smiles, no attempting to ingratiate herself with the city's power players, just quiet competence and an underlying strength that intrigued him. Earth to Alex. His sister Victoria's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Are you even listening to me? This merger is crucial for Sterling Enterprises, and you're staring into space like a lovesick teenager. Alexander turned back to his sister, adjusting his platinum cufflinks, a 25th birthday gift from their father. The Morrison deal is practically done, Vic. Their board approved our terms this morning. That's not the point, Victoria huffed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. Dad's watching you like a hawk. One wrong move, and he'll start reconsidering his succession plans. Is that what you want? The weight of expectation pressed down on Alexander's shoulders, like a familiar but unwelcome burden. As the heir to Sterling Enterprises' $12 billion empire, every move he made was scrutinized, every decision analyzed. His father, Richard Sterling, had built the company from the ground up, transforming a small real estate venture into a global investment powerhouse. Now, at 65, he was looking to pass the reins to his son, assuming Alexander proved worthy. The waitress approached their table again, her simple black uniform somehow more elegant than Victoria's designer dress. Would you like to see the dessert menu? Her voice was soft but clear, with an underlying confidence that caught Alexander's attention. Yes, please, he said, finally getting a chance to read her name tag. Thank you, Sarah. She gave a small nod and turned to retrieve the menus, but Victoria's sharp voice stopped her. Actually, we'll skip dessert. Just the check, please. His sister's dismissive tone made Alexander wince internally. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her deep brown eyes, not hurt or anger, but a kind of knowing patience, as if she understood something about Victoria that Victoria didn't understand about herself. Of course, I'll bring that right away. As Sarah walked away, Victoria leaned forward. Seriously, Alex? The waitress? Don't tell me you're pulling a Richard Gere in Pretty Woman. Don't be ridiculous, Alexander replied, though his eyes followed Sarah's retreating form. I'm simply being polite. You might try it sometime. Victoria rolled her eyes. Spare me the noble act. You've been watching her all evening. What would Dad say if he knew his heir apparent was making eyes at the help? The comment stung, reminding Alexander of everything that was wrong with their world. The casual cruelty, the assumption of superiority, the way people were judged not by their character but by their bank accounts. When Sarah returned with the check, Alexander made sure to leave a generous tip, earning another eye roll from his sister. As they stood to leave, he noticed Sarah collecting dishes from a nearby table. Her movements efficient but graceful. Something made him pause. Go ahead, he told Victoria. I need to make a quick call. His sister gave him a knowing look, but headed toward the exit. Alexander waited until she was gone before approaching Sarah. Excuse me, Sarah? She turned, professional mask firmly in place. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Was there something wrong with your service? No, quite the opposite, actually. He pulled out one of his business cards, expensive cardstock heavy between his fingers. I was wondering, would you be interested in having dinner with me sometime? Not here, obviously, somewhere of your choosing. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, not the practiced smile of someone being asked out by a wealthy patron, but something more genuine and slightly amused. That's very flattering, Mr. Sterling, but I don't date customers. It's a personal policy. Her rejection was polite but firm, and somehow made her even more intriguing. What if I came back when you weren't working? Would I be a customer then? That drew a small laugh from her. Clever, but I'm afraid the answer is still no. Thank you, though. Alexander knew he should leave it at that, but something compelled him to press on. May I ask why? Sarah glanced around the restaurant, then met his eyes directly. Because, Mr. Sterling, you don't know anything about me except that I can balance a tray and remember drink orders. And I don't know anything about you except that you're Alexander Sterling, heir to Sterling Enterprises. And you leave good tips. That's not exactly a foundation for anything meaningful, is it? Her honesty was refreshing, but before he could respond, she added, Besides, I have a very full life. I don't have time for... She gestured vaguely at his expensive suit and the luxurious restaurant around them. All this. With that, she turned back to her work, leaving Alexander standing there, more intrigued than ever. As he walked out into the cool Boston evening, his mind kept returning to her words, her quiet confidence, the way she seemed completely unimpressed by his wealth and status. The next morning, Alexander sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, trying to focus on quarterly reports, but finding his thoughts drifting to Sarah. A knock on his door preceded his assistant, Michael, entering with a tablet in hand. Sir, your father wants to see you about the Morrison deal, and the board meeting is in 30 minutes. Michael paused, noting Alexander's distraction. Is everything all right? Alexander straightened in his leather chair. Yes, fine. Just, Michael, could you do me a favor? Discreetly. Of course, sir. There's a waitress at La Maison named Sarah. Dark hair, early 20s. Could you find out more about her? Where she lives, what she does when she's not working at the restaurant? Michael's expression remained professional, but Alexander caught the slight raise of his eyebrows. I'll see what I can find out, sir. Any particular reason? Just curiosity, Alexander replied, standing and adjusting his tie. She seemed different. Later that afternoon, Michael returned with a thin file. Sarah Chen, 26 years old, works at La Maison 5 nights a week, lives in a modest apartment in Somerville. No social media presence to speak of, which is unusual for someone her age. He paused. There's something else that's interesting. She seems to work somewhere during the day, but I couldn't find any employment records. She leaves her apartment every morning at 8 and returns around 5, but I couldn't trace where she goes. Alexander frowned. A second job that's off the books? Perhaps, Michael said carefully. Though she doesn't seem to be struggling financially, her apartment is modest, but in a good neighborhood, and she drives a recent model Toyota Camry. Nothing flashy, but certainly not someone living paycheck to paycheck. The mystery deepened. A waitress with no social media presence, a second job that couldn't be traced, and a lifestyle that didn't quite match her apparent income. Who was Sarah Chen, really? Alexander knew he should let it go. He had the Morrison merger to focus on, his father's expectations to meet, and a board of directors watching his every move. But something about Sarah nagged at him, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. That evening, against his better judgment, he returned to La Maison. He requested a table in Sarah's section and waited, telling himself he was being ridiculous. When she appeared at his table, her expression showed no surprise, as if she'd been expecting him. Good evening, Mr. Sterling, dining alone tonight? Please, call me Alex, he said, then added with a small smile. And yes, no disapproving sister this evening. Sarah's lips twitched slightly. What can I get for you? Alex, actually, I have a question first. He met her eyes directly. Why does a woman who can afford to live in Somerville and drive a new Camry work as a waitress? And where do you go every day between 8 and 5? Her expression cooled immediately. You had me investigated. I was curious. Curiosity doesn't justify invasion of privacy, Mr. Sterling. The return to formality was deliberate. My life outside this restaurant is none of your business. I apologize, he said quickly, genuinely regretting his approach. You're right. That was completely inappropriate. There's something about you, Sarah. Something that doesn't add up. And I'd like to understand what it is. She studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. Why? Because I'm not what you expected. Because I don't fit into your neat categories of rich and poor, worthy and unworthy? Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. No, because you're the first person I've met in a long time who sees me as just a person, not a sterling. And I'd like to know who that person is seeing. Something in Sarah's eyes changed, a flicker of understanding or perhaps recognition. She glanced around the restaurant, then made a decision. My shift ends at 10. If you're still here, maybe we can talk, but not as a waitress and a customer, just as people. Alexander felt a smile spread across his face. I'd like that. Don't get too excited, she warned, though her eyes held a hint of amusement. I'm still not going to date you. As she walked away to tend to her other tables, Alexander couldn't help but feel that he was on the verge of discovering something important. He just didn't realize how important it would turn out to be, or how it would challenge everything he thought he knew about wealth, worth, and what truly matters in life. Don't stop now. This story is about to reveal a secret that will change everything. Keep watching to discover what Sarah is really hiding. The kitchen of La Maison buzzed with end-of-shift activity as Sarah emerged through the service door at precisely 10 o'clock. Her waitress uniform replaced by dark jeans and a simple blue sweater. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and without the constraints of her work attire, she carried herself differently, more relaxed, but somehow more commanding. Alexander stood from his table, where he'd been nursing a glass of wine for the past hour, reviewing contracts on his tablet while stealing glances at Sarah throughout her shift. She approached him with measured steps, her expression neutral, but evaluating. There's a small cafe around the corner, she said without preamble. They make decent coffee and stay open late. Shall we? The cafe was nothing like the upscale establishments Alexander usually frequented. Mismatched furniture filled the cozy space, and local artwork covered the walls. The barista greeted Sarah by name, already preparing what seemed to be her usual order. Come here often? Alexander asked as they settled into a corner table, away from the few other late-night patrons. It's my thinking spot, Sarah replied, wrapping her hands around a steaming mug of chai tea. When I need to make important decisions or clear my head. And is that what you need tonight? To clear your head? She met his gaze steadily. I'm trying to decide if I'm making a mistake talking to you. Because I'm a sterling? Because you had me investigated. She took a sip of her tea. That shows both privilege and presumption. You assumed you had the right to know about my life simply because your curiosity was piqued. Alexander felt the familiar weight of shame. You're right. I apologize again. I'm used to having access to information, to being able to know things when I want to know them. It's not an excuse, just an explanation. Sarah's expression softened slightly. That kind of power can be dangerous, Alex. It can make you forget that people have the right to their own stories, told in their own time. Is that why you work at La Maison? To remind people of that? A small smile played at her lips. I work at La Maison because I believe in understanding different perspectives. The wealthy, the powerful, they're just people too. Sometimes they forget that. Sometimes they need someone to remind them. Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed. His father's name flashed on the screen. With an apologetic glance at Sarah, he answered, Dad, it's late. The Morrison deal is falling apart. Richard Sterling's voice cut through the line, sharp with anger. Their CEO just called. Says he's having second thoughts about the terms. I need you in the office first thing tomorrow, no excuses. The call ended as abruptly as it began. Alexander stared at his phone, his mind already racing through implications and possible solutions. Trouble? Sarah asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. A deal we've been working on for months might be collapsing. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I should go. I need to review the contracts, prepare for tomorrow. Of course. Sarah stood, gathering her bag. The weight of the Sterling Empire calls. Something in her tone made him pause. You say that like you understand. Maybe I do. She hesitated, then added, My father was wealthy too. Before he lost everything trying to save people who couldn't be saved. It was the first personal detail she'd offered freely, and Alexander sensed its significance. What happened to him? He died, believing money could solve every problem, that if he just worked harder, earned more, gave more, he could fix the world. She smiled sadly. He forgot that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't money, it's understanding, dignity, a chance to solve their own problems. The words hit Alexander with unexpected force, echoing thoughts he'd had but never voiced. How many times had he watched his father throw money at problems without addressing their root causes? How often had he himself done the same? "Is that what you do during the day?" he asked suddenly. "Help people solve their own problems?" Sarah's eyes flickered with something, surprise perhaps, or appreciation for his insight. Something like that. Before he could press further, his phone buzzed again, this time with messages from his assistant about emergency meetings being scheduled for the morning. "Go," Sarah said, understanding in her voice. "Save your empire. But to think about what I said, about money and problems and solutions." Alexander stood but hesitated. "Will you have dinner with me? A real dinner, not at La Maison. No sterling name, no expectations, just dinner." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Alex Sterling. Is that a yes? It's a I'll think about it." She pulled out a pen and wrote something on a napkin. "This is my number. If you figure out why you really want to have dinner with me, beyond curiosity and the thrill of solving a mystery, text me." The next morning, Alexander sat in Sterling Enterprises' main conference room, surrounded by anxious executives and lawyers. The Morrison deal was indeed in trouble. Their CEO was concerned about potential job losses after the merger, about community impact, about more than just the bottom line. As Alexander listened to his father rage about emotional decision-making and weak leadership, Sarah's words from the night before echoed in his mind. Understanding, dignity, the chance to solve their own problems. "What if we're approaching this wrong?" he said suddenly, interrupting his father mid-tirade. The room fell silent. "Excuse me?" Richard Sterling's voice was dangerous. "Morrison's concerns aren't just about money, they're about people. What if instead of just increasing our offer, we work with them to develop a comprehensive transition plan, one that prioritizes job retention and community investment?" His father's face reddened. "We're not running a charity, Alexander. We're running a business." "Yes, and businesses depend on people, depend on communities. What if doing the right thing could also be good business?" The words felt right as he said them, even as his father's expression darkened. Alexander pulled up the contract on his tablet, mind racing with new possibilities. For the first time, he was seeing the deal not just as numbers on a page, but as something that affected real lives. "Give me 24 hours, he said, standing. "Let me revise the proposal. If Morrison still says no, we can go back to your approach." His father stared at him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. 24 hours, don't disappoint me, Alexander." As the meeting dispersed, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Having trouble with your empire? Maybe you need a different perspective." "Lunch, Sarah?" Alexander smiled, typing back, "Thought you wanted me to figure out why I want to have dinner with you first?" Her response came quickly. "Consider this research. Meet me at 47 Winter Street at 1 p.m. Don't wear a suit." The address led him to a modest building in downtown Boston, its brick facade weathered but well-maintained. A simple plaque beside the door read, "New Horizons Foundation." Sarah waited outside, dressed in business casual attire that suggested a very different role than her waitress uniform. "Welcome to my day job," she said, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Ready to see how the other half lives?" As Alexander followed her inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover something that would change everything, not just about Sarah, but about himself and the entire world he thought he knew so well. The interior of New Horizons Foundation was a stark contrast to Sterling Enterprises' sleek corporate offices. Instead of marble and chrome, warm woods and comfortable furniture created a welcoming atmosphere. The walls displayed photographs of smiling people, families, workers, children, each image telling a story of lives touched and changed. "You run this place," Alexander said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, leading him through a busy common area where people worked at shared tables, their conversations a mix of multiple languages. "I founded it 3 years ago. We provide microloans, business education, and mentorship to immigrants and low-income entrepreneurs. People who have the drive and ideas to succeed but lack the resources or connections." They stopped at a window overlooking a classroom where a diverse group of adults sat engaged in what appeared to be a business planning session. "Instead of just giving handouts," Sarah continued, "we invest in people. We help them build sustainable businesses that can support their families and strengthen their communities." Alexander watched the class, thinking about the Morrison deal, about his father's approach to business, about everything he'd been taught about wealth and success. "How do you fund it?" Sarah's smile held a hint of irony. "Would you believe me if I said through investing in people? We take a small percentage of our successful businesses' profits and reinvest them in new entrepreneurs. It's not charity, it's smart business that happens to do good. And the waitressing? Keeps me grounded, reminds me what it's like to work hard for every dollar. Plus," she added with a slight smirk, "you'd be amazed what you can learn about people by serving them dinner." Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another message about the Morrison deal. Sarah noticed his expression change. "Your empire calling again?" "Morrison Enterprises," he explained. "They're worried about job losses after our merger, about community impact. I've been trying to revise our approach, but you're stuck thinking like a sterling," Sarah finished. She gestured to the classroom. "Want to know what I've learned here? The best solutions come from understanding what people really need, not just what we think they should want." Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. "Would you help me with the Morrison deal? I have 24 hours to come up with a new proposal, and I think I need a different perspective." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "Why? Because you want to save the deal, or because you want to do what's right?" "Both," he admitted honestly, "but mostly I want to prove that business doesn't have to be just about profit, that my father's way isn't the only way." A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. "Now that," she said, "might be a good enough reason for dinner. Has this story touched your heart? Subscribe to our channel. New life-changing stories every day. Click that subscribe button to join our family of dreamers and believers." The city lights of Boston twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse office as he and Sarah worked into the night. Takeout containers from a local Thai restaurant sat forgotten on his desk, and spreadsheets and documents covered every available surface. They'd been at it for hours, completely reimagining the Morrison deal from the ground up. "Look at these numbers again," Sarah said, pointing to a projection chart on her laptop. Her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a lotus flower. "If we structure the merger around department integration rather than immediate consolidation, we can preserve nearly 80% of the current jobs while still achieving the efficiency targets." Alexander leaned closer, the subtle scent of her jasmine perfume momentarily distracting him. "The board won't like the delayed return on investment, but the community goodwill and employee retention will create long-term value that far exceeds short-term gains." Sarah turned to face him, their proximity suddenly apparent. "Sometimes you have to look beyond the next quarter to see the real opportunity." The intensity in her eyes made Alexander's breath catch. He'd never met anyone who combined such practical business acumen with genuine compassion. "Like you did with New Horizons?" Sarah's expression softened. "That was different, that was personal." "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me about your father." She was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently touching the lotus charm. "My father, James Chen, was a lot like yours in some ways. Brilliant, driven, always certain he knew best. He built Chen Global Investments from nothing, became one of the most respected names in Asian markets, She smiled sadly. And then the financial crisis hit. Alexander watched as she stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights. Instead of protecting his assets, he tried to save everyone. His employees, his partners, even competitors. He leveraged everything, believing he could stem the tide through sheer force of will. When it all collapsed, he didn't just lose the company. He lost himself. What happened? He died of a heart attack 3 months later. The doctors said it was stress, but I knew better. It was a broken heart. She turned back to Alexander, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The worst part, in trying to save everyone, he ended up saving no one. His employees still lost their jobs. The businesses he tried to prop up still failed. All that money, all that sacrifice, and nothing really changed. Alexander stood, moving toward her. That's why you started New Horizons? To find a better way? I realized that throwing money at problems isn't enough. People need tools, education, support, but most of all, they need to be empowered to save themselves. She met his eyes. That's what your Morrison proposal needs to show. It's not about Sterling Enterprises swooping in to save the day. It's about creating a partnership that helps everyone succeed. Before Alexander could respond, the office door burst open. Victoria Sterling strode in, her Louboutins clicking against the marble floor. She stopped short at the sight of them standing close together by the window. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The waitress, I should have known." Sarah straightened, professional mask sliding into place. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. I was just leaving." "Were you?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Or were you trying to seduce your way into our family fortune?" "Victoria!" Alexander's voice was sharp. "Sarah is helping me with the Morrison deal. She has expertise that—" "Expertise?" Victoria laughed coldly. "Is that what we're calling it now? Do you even know who she really is, Alex? Did you know her father nearly destroyed 3 major investment firms before his company collapsed?" Sarah went pale, but her voice remained steady. "You've done your research." "Of course I have. The moment I saw Alex mooning over you at the restaurant, I knew you were trouble. James Chen was a fool who thought he could change how business works. Looks like the apple didn't fall far from the tree." "That's enough," Alexander stepped between them. "Sarah's ideas for the Morrison deal are brilliant. If you just listen—" "Oh, I've heard enough." Victoria pulled out her phone, tapping rapidly. "And so has Dad. Board meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late, brother dear." She smiled viciously at Sarah. "I'd wish you good luck, but we both know how this ends." After Victoria left, the office fell into heavy silence. Sarah began gathering her things, her movements precise and controlled. "Sarah, wait." Alexander reached for her arm. "Don't let her get to you. What happened with your father doesn't change anything, doesn't it?" She pulled away gently. "Your sister's right about one thing. I am my father's daughter. I believe business can be about more than just profit. That wealth comes with responsibility. That success shouldn't come at the cost of other people's lives." She met his eyes. "Can you say the same?" "I want to," he said honestly. "Working with you these past few days, seeing what you've built at New Horizons, it's shown me a different way, a better way. But I'm also a Sterling. The company, the legacy, the responsibility, it's all I've ever known. If the board rejects our proposal tomorrow, then you'll have a choice to make," Sarah finished softly. "Just like my father did." She walked to the door but paused before leaving. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Alex, remember this. True wealth isn't about how much money you have. It's about what you do with it." After she left, Alexander sat at his desk, staring at their work, the carefully crafted proposals, the innovative solutions, the bold reimagining of what Sterling Enterprises could be. His phone buzzed with a message from his father. "My office, 8 a.m. Come prepared to explain yourself." Another message followed, this one from an anonymous number. "Sterling heir, secretly working with daughter of disgraced financier. Excellent story. Care to comment before we run it?" Alexander's blood ran cold. Someone had leaked the story to the press. By morning, everything would explode. The Morrison deal, his position at Sterling Enterprises, his budding relationship with Sarah, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd begun to dream of, was about to come crashing down. His finger hovered over Sarah's number in his contacts. Should he warn her, ask for her help, run away from it all? The lotus charm she wore flashed in his memory, a symbol of beauty emerging from mud, of transformation through adversity. Tomorrow would test everything he thought he knew about himself, about business, about what really mattered in life. And somewhere in the city, Sarah Chen sat in her modest apartment, touching that same lotus charm, wondering if she'd made the same mistake her father had, believing that one person could change a system built on generations of greed and power. The night deepened, the city lights flickered, and two people from very different worlds faced the same question. When everything you believe in collides with everything you've been taught, which path do you choose? Can love triumph over family legacy? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to find out what happens next. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. But Alexander Sterling hadn't slept. He stood in his father's office at 7:55 a.m., staring at the morning headlines on his tablet. Sterling Enterprises heir conspires with daughter of failed financier. Chen global scandal resurfaces. Sarah Chen's secret connection to Sterling Empire. Morrison deal in jeopardy. Sterling family drama threatens billion-dollar merger. The door opened, and Richard Sterling strode in, his face a mask of cold fury. He tossed a newspaper onto his mahogany desk. There was Sarah's face, an old photo from her father's company collapse, alongside Alexander's most recent corporate headshot. "Explain," Richard demanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Explain why my son, my heir, has been secretly meeting with James Chen's daughter to undermine our biggest deal of the year." "I'm not undermining anything," Alexander said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Sarah helped me develop a better approach to the Morrison merger, one that could benefit everyone involved." "Benefit everyone?" Richard's laugh was harsh. "Just like her father tried to benefit everyone before he destroyed billions in shareholder value? She's using you, Alexander, playing on your emotions to sabotage this company, just like her father tried to sabotage the entire market." "You don't know her," Alexander insisted. "You haven't seen what she's built with New Horizons, how she's helping people." "Oh, I know all about her little charity project." Richard pulled up something on his computer, turning the screen toward Alexander. "In fact, I know something she doesn't. Take a look at who's been quietly funding her foundation through shell companies for the past year." Alexander leaned forward, his blood running cold as he recognized the complex web of corporate entities, all leading back to Victoria Sterling's personal investment fund. "Your sister has been watching Sarah Chen for months," Richard continued. "Ever since New Horizons started competing with some of our community development initiatives, Victoria was convinced Sarah had an agenda against Sterling Enterprises." "Looks like she was right." "That's impossible," Alexander whispered. But doubt crept into his mind. Had Sarah known? Was this all an elaborate plan to get close to Sterling Enterprises through him? "Board meeting in 30 minutes, Richard said, straightening his tie. "You have two choices, son. Either you publicly distance yourself from Sarah Chen and support our original approach to the Morrison deal, or you can clean out your office. Your choice." Alexander's phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "We need to talk. Meet me at New Horizons, please." "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the door. "If you walk out now," his father called after him, "don't bother coming back." The morning sun cast long shadows across the New Horizons office as Alexander burst through the doors. Sarah stood by the window, her face pale but composed, as she studied a document in her hands. "Did you know?" Alexander demanded without preamble. "Did you know Victoria was funding New Horizons?" Sarah turned, surprise and confusion crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" "My sister. She's been channeling money through shell companies into your foundation." Was this all part of some plan? Get close to me, influence the Morrison deal, maybe take down Sterling Enterprises like your father tried to— Stop! Sarah's voice cut through his accusations. Just stop! She held out the document she'd been reading. I just found out this morning. All of our major anonymous donations from the past year had tracked back to Victoria Sterling, but I swear, Alexander, I had no idea. He took the paper, scanning the detailed financial trail Sarah had uncovered. Why would Victoria do this? Control? Leverage? Take your pick. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in every movement. She probably thought she could use this to discredit me if I ever became a problem. Well, congratulations to her. It worked. Sarah? Alexander stepped closer, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Just don't. She took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. The real reason I started New Horizons, why I keep working at La Maison, why I was interested in Sterling Enterprises in the first place. She walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick folder and handed it to him. Inside were documents, photographs, and newspaper clippings, all about his father and Sterling Enterprises. 3 months before my father died, Sarah said quietly, he discovered something about Sterling Enterprises, about how your father had manipulated the market during the financial crisis, purposely weakening smaller firms so he could acquire them at bargain prices. My father tried to expose it, but no one would listen. They all thought he was crazy, desperate, trying to blame others for his own failures. Alexander felt the world tilt beneath his feet. That's not possible. My father wouldn't. Look at the evidence. Alex, the pattern of acquisitions, the suspicious timing of market movements, the perfectly positioned trades. Your father didn't just survive the financial crisis, he orchestrated parts of it. And my father, her voice caught, my father died trying to stop him. The weight of truth crashed down on Alexander. All those years of admiring his father's business acumen, his perfect timing, his ability to find opportunities where others saw only crisis. It had all been carefully planned destruction. The Morrison deal, he realized suddenly. It's happening again, isn't it? The same pattern. Sarah nodded grimly. That's why I approached you, why I let myself get close to you. I thought if I could show you a different way of doing business, if I could prove that success doesn't have to come at the cost of destroying others. She smiled sadly. I told myself it was just business, that my growing feelings for you were separate from my mission. I was wrong. Alexander's phone buzzed again, a reminder about the board meeting. In 15 minutes, he would have to choose, stand with his father and the empire built on calculated destruction, or risk everything for what he knew was right. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because you deserve to know the truth before you make your choice. Sarah stepped close, reaching up to touch his face gently. And because despite everything, my mission, my guilt, my promise to my father's memory, I've fallen in love with you, Alexander Sterling. And I can't let you walk into that board meeting without knowing exactly what you're fighting for. The touch of her hand, the truth in her eyes, the weight of decades of lies and manipulation, it all crystallized into perfect clarity for Alexander. He knew what he had to do. Come with me, he said, taking her hand. Where? To the board meeting. His eyes held a determined glint. It's time for Sterling Enterprises to face its past and choose its future. Sarah's eyes widened. Alex, if we do this, there's no going back. Your father, Victoria, the whole Sterling Empire. I know, he squeezed her hand. But you were right about one thing. True wealth isn't about how much money you have. It's about what you do with it. And it's time for me to do something right. As they rushed toward Sterling Tower, both knew they were racing toward more than just a board meeting. They were racing toward a moment of truth that would either destroy everything they held dear or transform it into something new and better than either of them had imagined possible. The truth is about to be revealed. Subscribe now and don't miss the shocking conclusion that will leave you breathless. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom hummed with tension as Alexander and Sarah entered. Every head turned, expressions ranging from shock to disdain at Sarah's presence. Victoria's perfectly painted lips curled into a smirk, while Richard Sterling's face darkened with fury. "This is a private board meeting," Richard announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Miss Chen, you are not welcome here." "Actually," Alexander said, stepping forward, "she is. Because before we discuss the Morrison deal, we need to address the real crisis facing Sterling Enterprises." He moved to the head of the table, Sarah beside him, and connected his tablet to the room's display system. "A crisis that began during the financial collapse of 2008. Alexander," his father warned, "think very carefully about what you're about to do." "I have thought about it. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking clearly." He pulled up the document Sarah had shown him. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Sterling Enterprises has built its modern empire on a foundation of deliberate market manipulation and targeted destruction of competitors." The room erupted in chaos. Board members shouted questions. Victoria jumped to her feet, and Richard Sterling's face went from red to purple. But Alexander continued, his voice steady as he detailed the evidence. The pattern of suspicious trades, the coordinated market movements, the strategic destruction of companies like Chen Global Investments. "This isn't just about past sins," Alexander concluded. "The Morrison deal follows the same pattern. We're not acquiring them. We're forcing them into a position where they have no choice but to sell. And then we'll strip their assets, lay off their workers, and destroy another community in the name of profit." "You have no proof," Victoria snapped, but her voice wavered slightly. Sarah stepped forward. "Actually, we do." She placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains every transaction, every communication, every piece of evidence my father collected before his death, along with proof of Victoria's attempt to control New Horizons through shell companies." "Your father was a failure who couldn't handle the realities of business," Richard snarled. "Just like my son is proving to be." "No, Dad," Alexander said quietly. "The failure is continuing to believe that success only counts if someone else fails, that wealth only matters if it comes at the cost of others' suffering." He straightened, addressing the entire board. "I'm proposing a new direction for Sterling Enterprises. One that proves we can be profitable and ethical, successful and sustainable." He launched into the proposal he and Sarah had developed, not just for Morrison Enterprises, but for a complete restructuring of Sterling Enterprises' approach to acquisitions and community investment. As he spoke, he could see some board members leaning forward, interest sparking in their eyes. "This is ridiculous," Victoria interrupted. "We'd be throwing away decades of proven strategy for some idealistic fantasy." "Would we?" Alexander pulled up New Horizons' success metrics. "Sarah's foundation has a 92% success rate with their investments. Their community development projects show better long-term returns than our aggressive acquisition strategy. And they've done it all with a fraction of our resources." "The market will never accept this," Richard declared, but a note of uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The market is changing, Dad. Investors care about more than just quarterly profits now. They want sustainability, responsibility, real community impact." Alexander met his father's eyes. "You taught me that a good businessman sees where the market is going, not just where it's been. Well, this is where it's going." An older board member, Janet Chen, no relation to Sarah, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Richard, I've served on this board for 20 years. I've supported your strategies because they worked, but Alexander is right. Times are changing. Maybe it's time we change too." One by one, other board members began nodding. Richard Sterling looked around the table, seeing his iron grip on the company starting to slip. His face hardened. "Fine. You want to put it to a vote? Let's vote. But remember, Alexander, if this fails, you're not just losing your position. You're losing your inheritance, your place in this family, everything." "No, Dad," Alexander said softly. "I'm gaining something much more valuable. Integrity. The vote was close, painfully close, but when Janet Chen cast the deciding vote in favor of Alexander's proposal, history shifted. Richard Sterling stormed out of the boardroom, Victoria close behind him, but Alexander barely noticed. He was looking at Sarah, seeing the pride and love shining in her eyes. Months later, Alexander stood at the podium of New Horizons' expanded headquarters, now the community development arm of Sterling Enterprises. The room was packed with entrepreneurs, community leaders, and yes, even some of the old guard from Sterling Enterprises who had come to believe in the new vision. "My father always told me that business was about being tough," he addressed the crowd, "about winning at all costs. It took a waitress with a secret foundation and a dream of changing the world to show me that true strength lies in lifting others up, not pushing them down." Sarah, standing in the front row, smiled up at him, her lotus charm catching the light. She no longer needed to work at La Maison, though she still stopped by occasionally to remind herself and others of where she came from. "Sterling Enterprises' new mission is simple," Alexander continued. "We will be successful, not despite helping others succeed, but because of it. We will be wealthy not by hoarding resources, but by investing them wisely in communities and people who need just one opportunity to shine." That evening, as they walked along the harbor where their story began, Alexander stopped and turned to Sarah. "You know, when I first saw you at La Maison, I thought you were a mystery I needed to solve. Instead, you helped me solve the mystery of who I really wanted to be." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And who is that?" "Someone worthy of his name, not because of how much money he has, but because of what he chooses to do with it." He pulled her close. "Someone worthy of you? You already were," she whispered. "You just needed to believe it." The setting sun painted the sky in shades of possibility, its light reflecting off the water like the promise of a new day. Richard Sterling had retreated to his mansion, refusing to speak to his son, but unable to stop the transformation of his company. Victoria had taken a position with a rival firm, her ambitions unchanged, but her power diminished. But in the end, those were just footnotes to a larger story. A story about two people from different worlds who discovered that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives you touch and the changes you inspire. A story about love that grows not from power or prestige, but from shared values and the courage to stand up for what's right. As Alexander and Sarah walked home together, they passed La Maison. Through the window, they could see the crystal chandelier casting familiar shadows, the wealthy patrons dining in luxury. But now they saw something else too, the hard-working staff, the hidden stories, the humanity that money couldn't buy and power couldn't touch. "Ready to change the world?" Sarah asked, her eyes twinkling. Alexander kissed her softly. "With you, I'm ready for anything." And in that moment, with the city lights beginning to twinkle and their shared dreams stretching out before them, both knew that they had found something far more precious than gold. They had found their true fortune in each other and in the chance to prove that success doesn't have to come at the cost of someone else's failure. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for everyone whose lives they would touch. A testament to the power of love to transform not just hearts, but entire empires, and proof that sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what you gain, but from what you're willing to give. What would you have done in Alexander's position? Chosen family legacy or followed your heart? Share your thoughts below. Do you believe true love can transform not just hearts, but entire empires? Tell us what you think. Did this story move you? Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this journey of love and transformation, you won't want to miss our next incredible story waiting for you on the left. Another unforgettable tale that will touch your heart and prove that anything is possible when you dare to believe.